These aren't bad habits, they're survival strategies. But what once protected you may now be quietly draining you. If you're a highly sensitive person, you've probably noticed that life often feels louder, sharper, more overwhelming than it seems for others. To survive in environments that didn't always understand your depth, your nervous system did something brilliant. It created shadow habits, unconscious patterns that helped you feel safe, accepted, and connected. Maybe you became the peacemaker, always smoothing over conflict before it erupted. Maybe you learned to absorb everyone else's pain so no one had to carry it alone. Maybe you even taught yourself to anticipate what people wanted before they spoke a word, so you'd never risk rejection. Each of these habits was born out of love, out of an instinct to protect your heart, to preserve your belonging, to keep you alive in a world that often feels too much. But here's the paradox. What saved you then may be limiting you now. These habits that once shielded your sensitivity are now quietly draining your energy, your authenticity, and your joy. In this video, we're going to shine a light on 5 of the most common shadow habits of highly sensitive people. You'll see them for what they really are. Not flaws, not weaknesses, but outdated defenses. And most importantly, you'll learn how to transform each one into a source of strength, turning the very patterns that once held you back into the keys to your empowerment. There's a shadow habit many highly sensitive people know all too well. It's called the Fawning Reflex, the compulsion to keep everyone around you comfortable, even if it costs you your own truth. This pattern often begins in childhood. Imagine a sensitive child in a loud household where tension rises quickly and conflict feels like an earthquake. That child learns something very early. If I can keep everyone happy, if I can meet their needs before they even ask, maybe I'll be safe. Maybe I won't be abandoned. For a nervous system wired to pick up every subtle shift, the sigh, the silence, the raised eyebrow, fawning becomes a brilliant survival strategy. It's a way of reading the room, bending yourself into the shape of what others want, so you don't have to face rejection or anger. On the surface, it looks like kindness, generosity, even love. But underneath, it's fear. The fear that being fully yourself might be too much for the people you depend on. The cost of this habit is heavy. Over time, your authentic self begins to erode. You say yes when you mean no. You agree when your body screams otherwise. You absorb everyone else's needs while quietly silencing your own. At first, people may praise you. You're so understanding, so selfless. But inside, exhaustion builds. Resentment smolders. You wake up one day realizing you've been living as a mirror for others, not as a soul in your own right. Carl Jung understood this dynamic deeply. He warned that when we hide too much of ourselves to keep the peace, we exile essential parts of our psyche into the shadow. Those hidden parts don't disappear. They just wait. And they wait in silence until, eventually, they erupt as burnout, depression, or explosive anger. So how do you transform this habit? The answer isn't to stop caring or to harden your heart. Sensitivity and empathy are your gifts. They are not the problem. The shift comes when you realize empathy doesn't require self-erasure. One of the most powerful practices for those who fawn is learning the art of micro-boundaries. You don't have to leap into confrontation or say no with fire in your voice. Start small. Practice pausing before you respond. Let yourself say, "I need to think about that," instead of the automatic yes. Notice the subtle sensations in your body when you're about to abandon yourself for the comfort of others. That tension in your chest, that sinking in your stomach. That's your inner compass saying, "Don't disappear here." Stay present. Micro-boundaries are acts of self-trust. They allow you to preserve your empathy while also preserving yourself. Instead of giving away your time, energy, and attention automatically, you learn to share them with intention. Instead of fawning to feel safe, you stand in authenticity to feel whole. At first, setting even the smallest boundary may feel terrifying. Old fears will rise. What if they leave me? What if they get angry? But what often happens is surprising. Healthy people will respect your honesty. Unhealthy people may fall away. Either way, you are no longer trading your soul for temporary safety. And here's the transformation. When you stop people-pleasing, your relationships don't become colder. They become deeper. Because love rooted in fawning isn't love at all. It's performance. But love rooted in authenticity has space for the real you, not just the version of you who keeps others comfortable. So remember this. The fawning reflex was never a flaw. It was a child's brilliant strategy to survive in a world that felt overwhelming. But you are no longer that child. You can retire the survival strategy and step into a new pattern, one where your empathy is powerful, but your truth is intact. This is how shadow turns into strength. This is how sensitivity becomes sovereignty. If the fawning reflex is about pleasing others, then hyper-empathy is about feeling others, so intensely that their pain becomes your own. For highly sensitive people, this is often celebrated as a gift. You're the friend who notices the crack in someone's voice before they've admitted they're hurting. You're the one who feels the energy of a room the moment you walk in. But here's the shadow. When empathy turns into absorption, you stop being an observer and become a sponge. You confuse compassion with carrying. You blur the line between where you end and another begins. Carl Jung might say this happens because you confuse the collective unconscious with personal responsibility. You sense the undercurrents of humanity, the grief, the longing, the fear, and instead of witnessing, you internalize them. You feel responsible for emotions that were never yours to hold. At first, it feels noble. You think, if I can shoulder their pain, maybe they'll suffer less. But over time, hyper-empathy drains you. You find yourself exhausted after social interactions, overwhelmed by the suffering of the world, paralyzed by the sheer weight of feelings you cannot resolve. Relationships become imbalanced. You play healer, counselor, caretaker, while quietly neglecting your own soul. The cost is subtle, but devastating. Self-erasure. You start mistaking other people's emotions for your own. You carry anger that isn't yours. You sink under grief that doesn't belong to you. And somewhere along the way, your own authentic feelings get lost in the storm. Jung warned that when we merge too much with the collective unconscious, we lose individuation, the very process of becoming our unique selves. Sensitivity without boundaries doesn't make you more loving. It dissolves your identity into the ocean of everyone else's projections. So how do we transform this shadow? By practicing empathy with containment. This means remembering a powerful truth. I can witness, but I don't have to carry. Think of empathy as standing at the edge of a river. Hyper-empathy is diving in and being swept away by the current of someone else's pain. Healthy empathy is sitting at the bank, acknowledging the river's power, even feeling its mist on your face, but remaining on solid ground. You don't abandon your stability, and you don't mistake their water for your own blood. Here are a few ways to practice this containment. 1. Name what's yours versus theirs. When you feel a sudden wave of sadness or anxiety, pause and ask, is this mine, or did I just pick it up from someone near me? That simple question creates a psychic boundary. 2. Visualize release. Some HSPs find it helpful to imagine returning what they've absorbed. Picture placing the emotion back into the person's hands, or letting it flow out of your body into the earth. Not to reject them, but to trust that their soul, like yours, is capable of carrying its own lessons. 3. Anchor in your body. When emotions swirl, bring awareness to physical sensations, your breath, your feet on the floor, the rhythm of your heart. This grounds you in your life, your experience, and prevents merging with another's. The transformation is profound. You don't become less empathetic, you become sustainably empathetic. You still care deeply, but you no longer mistake compassion for sacrifice. You can listen to someone's sorrow without drowning in it. You can witness injustice without collapsing under its weight. You can love without losing yourself. And here's the paradox. When you stop carrying what isn't yours, your presence becomes more healing, not less. People don't actually need you to take away their pain. What they need is to be seen in it, clearly, calmly, without judgment. When you stay rooted in yourself, you create the safe container where genuine healing can occur. So remember, your gift is not in absorbing. Your gift is in witnessing. You are not here to carry every wound. You are here to stand as a mirror of strength, showing others that their pain can be endured without destroying them. This is empathy elevated. This is compassion with boundaries. This is the difference between losing yourself in someone's storm and becoming the steady ground they can finally stand on. One of the most exhausting shadow habits for highly sensitive people is what I call psychic mind reading. You know the feeling. You walk into a room, someone's energy shifts ever so slightly, and immediately your radar lights up. You start scanning their tone, their posture, the smallest changes in their expression, convinced you to know what they're thinking. This habit doesn't come from nowhere. For many sensitive children, tuning into subtle cues was a survival skill. Maybe you grew up in a household where moods changed without warning, or where conflict could erupt at any moment. Anticipating the emotional weather of others felt necessary. If you could guess what someone needed before they spoke, maybe you could avoid their disappointment, their anger, or their withdrawal. At first, it worked. This inner radar helped you stay safe. But over time, this constant guessing game creates a prison. Because instead of being present with others, you live inside your own interpretations of them. You assume, you overanalyze, you become so busy predicting what people feel that you stop listening to what they're actually saying. The cost is real: anxiety and distorted connection. Your nervous system stays on high alert, trying to catch signals that may not even exist. You worry about what people really meant, what they might secretly feel, what they're not telling you. And in this haze of assumptions, intimacy suffers. You might over-apologize for things no one actually noticed. You might pull away from relationships based on fears that were never true. Or you might silence your own needs because you've convinced yourself the other person would disapprove without ever checking. Carl Jung would recognize this as a shadow of intuition, our natural gift for reading the unconscious turned against us. Intuition becomes distortion when it replaces dialogue. What you believe is psychic accuracy is often projection, your own fears, insecurities, or unhealed wounds coloring how you interpret others. So how do you transform this habit? The answer lies in courageous communication. Instead of predicting, practice asking. Instead of assuming what someone feels, invite them to share. Instead of carrying silent stories in your head, bring them into the light where they can be clarified. At first, this feels terrifying. For someone who has relied on mind reading to feel safe, asking directly feels risky. What if you're rejected? What if they confirm your fear? But here's the truth. The risk of asking is far smaller than the cost of living inside untested assumptions. Try something simple. If you sense someone pulling away, instead of retreating in silence, ask gently, "I noticed you seem quieter than usual. Are you okay?" If you're unsure what someone thinks of you, resist the urge to overanalyze their texts or tone. Instead, ask directly. I want to make sure I understand. Can you tell me what you meant? Every time you choose asking over guessing, you reclaim a piece of your energy. You no longer burn yourself out trying to solve invisible puzzles, and you create the possibility for real connection. Connection based on truth, not interpretation. This is where the shadow transforms into power. Your sensitivity is not the problem. Your intuition is still a gift. But when you pair intuition with curiosity, it becomes wisdom. Instead of mind reading in silence, you use your intuitive radar as a starting point for authentic intimacy. You sense something, and then you check. You open the door for dialogue, and often you'll find that people respond with relief, because deep down, most people want to be known. They want to be asked. They want to be given the chance to reveal their truth, instead of being misjudged by assumptions. So remember, you don't have to be a psychic detective to earn love or safety. You only need the courage to replace prediction with presence. Intuition plus curiosity equals intimacy, and that intimacy is far more nourishing than any story your mind could ever invent. There's another shadow habit that quietly drains highly sensitive people. I call it noble martyrdom. The belief that if you suffer silently, you are strong. This archetype often begins in childhood. Sensitive souls who feel deeply may learn early on that their pain is too much for others to handle. Maybe when you cried, you were told to toughen up. Maybe when you expressed fear or sadness, you were met with dismissal or ridicule. So you adapted. You tucked your struggles away, deciding, if I carry this alone, I'll protect myself, and I'll protect others from my weight. Over time, this becomes an identity, the strong one, the reliable one, the friend who is always there for others but never asks for help in return. You become the silent sufferer, carrying everyone's burdens while convincing yourself that your own don't matter. On the surface, noble martyrdom looks admirable. People may even praise you for your strength, your resilience, your independence. But underneath, the cost is devastating. First, there is burnout. When you never allow yourself to rest or receive, your energy drains until even the smallest request feels overwhelming. Then comes bitterness. Quietly, resentment builds. You may wonder why no one checks on you, why no one seems to notice how much you give. But of course, they don't, because you've trained them to believe you never need support. Finally, there is isolation. Noble martyrdom keeps you separate, walled off in a self-made prison of strength. People see your competence, but not your humanity. They admire your endurance but miss your vulnerability, the very part of you that would allow them to truly connect. Carl Jung warned of this archetype. He saw how the shadow often masquerades as virtue. What looks like strength is sometimes just repression. What looks like selflessness is sometimes avoidance. And when we over-identify with the martyr, we deny ourselves the intimacy and mutuality that relationships are meant to provide. So how do we reframe this pattern? By realizing that true strength is not suffering in silence. It's asking for support. Think of it this way. Vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is trust. Every time you let someone see your struggle, you give them the opportunity to meet you in authenticity. You allow the relationship to expand from one-sided giving into reciprocal care. This doesn't mean collapsing into neediness or abandoning your independence. It means practicing the courage of saying, I could use some help right now. It means letting yourself cry in front of a trusted friend without apologizing. It means remembering that your sensitivity doesn't just make you a healer, it makes you human. And here's where the shadow transforms into power. The energy behind noble martyrdom is immense. It's the energy of devotion, of service, of carrying weight for those you love. But when you channel that energy with boundaries, it becomes sustainable. Instead of carrying everyone else's burdens silently, you choose the ones that are yours to hold. Instead of giving endlessly, you give intentionally, without erasing your own needs. Instead of isolating in strength, you share your struggles in a way that deepens intimacy and invites mutual support. This shift is life-changing. You discover that your worth was never measured by how much you can endure alone. Your strength is not in silent suffering, but in balanced giving. And paradoxically, when you allow yourself to receive, your capacity to give grows stronger. So remember this: the noble martyr archetype was never your true identity. It was a strategy, born of environments that didn't know how to hold your sensitivity. You don't need to sacrifice yourself to prove your strength. Real strength is carrying what is yours, sharing what is heavy, and walking the path of service with boundaries that protect your light. This is how martyrdom becomes leadership. This is how sacrifice becomes empowerment. And this is how your sensitivity stops being a prison and becomes your greatest source of connection. For highly sensitive people, perhaps the most insidious shadow habit of all is the inner critic, but not the obvious, loud critic that insults you directly. No, the shadow form is subtler. It's the voice of hyper-self-policing, the constant monitoring of everything you say, do, or feel, all in an attempt to avoid rejection. This voice doesn't come from nowhere. In childhood, many sensitive souls absorb the judgments of others like sponges. A parent's disapproval, a teacher's sharp correction, a peer's mocking laughter. All these experiences lodge themselves in the psyche. Over time, they fuse into an inner chorus that says, "Be careful. Don't be too much. Don't make mistakes. Don't let anyone see the real you, or you'll lose love." Jung would describe this as the psyche internalizing the parental imago, the voices of authority figures that once controlled us. But instead of protecting you, this internal critic becomes a tyrant. It polices every word, every action, every creative impulse before it can fully emerge. At first, this habit seems like it keeps you safe. By editing yourself constantly, you imagine you're avoiding conflict, disappointment, or humiliation. But the cost is profound. The inner critic steals your joy through perfectionism. You can't relax because nothing ever feels good enough. It creates paralysis. Opportunities pass you by because you're too busy second-guessing yourself, convinced that failure is inevitable. And worst of all, it robs you of aliveness. Joy requires freedom, spontaneity, and imperfection, the very things your critic won't allow. So you end up living half-hidden, a performer in your own life rather than an authentic participant. But here's the reframe. The inner critic is not actually your enemy. At its core, it is a guardian, a young, frightened part of you that desperately wants to keep you safe. Its vigilance is misplaced, yes, but its intention is love. And once you recognize that, you can stop battling your critic and start directing it. Instead of letting it crush your creativity, invite it to serve your self-awareness. For example, when the critic says, "You'll embarrass yourself if you speak up," pause and translate. "Ah, this is fear asking me to prepare carefully." When it hisses, "This idea is stupid," reframe it. "This is my nervous system asking me to refine, not abandon." By treating the critic as a loyal but misguided guard dog, you shift from suppression to partnership. You stop letting it run your life and instead give it a healthier role, to alert you, but not to decide for you. Here's where the shadow turns into power. The same vigilance that once kept you frozen can become fuel for creativity. Sensitive people often notice details others miss: tones, textures, inconsistencies. When directed inward with compassion, that vigilance becomes discernment. It helps you refine your art, your choices, your relationships, not out of fear, but out of devotion to authenticity. The critic, when integrated, sharpens your vision instead of blinding it. It becomes a creative editor rather than a cruel censor. It transforms from a voice of fear into a voice of refinement. And most importantly, when you soften the critic's grip, joy begins to return. You allow yourself to play, to experiment, to be imperfect. You give yourself permission to create without needing it to be flawless. You laugh again, because laughter doesn't require approval. So remember this: the inner critic in disguise is not proof that you're broken. It's proof that you once needed protection and your psyche obliged. But you're no longer a child needing to avoid every risk. You are an adult capable of turning that vigilance into wisdom, that self-policing into self-mastery. When you do, the critic stops being your jailer and becomes your ally. And that is the final transformation of the shadow into power. So let's bring this full circle. Each of these shadow habits, the Fawning Reflex, hyperempathy, psychic mind reading, noble martyrdom, and the inner critic, began as protection. They were brilliant strategies your younger self created to survive in a world that often felt overwhelming. But just because they once kept you safe doesn't mean they have to run your life now. When you make them conscious, something powerful happens. What used to drain you can begin to strengthen you. People-pleasing transforms into authentic empathy. Absorbing everyone else's pain shifts into compassionate witnessing. Guessing what others think evolves into courageous communication. Silent suffering becomes empowered service. And even your inner critic, when redirected, sharpens your awareness and fuels your creativity. You don't need to abandon your sensitivity. You need to harness it. Because sensitivity was never your weakness. It's your greatest source of depth, intuition, and connection. Now I'd love to hear from you. Which of these shadow habits resonated the most? Did you see yourself in the fawner, the mind reader, the martyr, or perhaps in that quiet but relentless inner critic? Share your reflections in the comments below. You never know how much your insight might help someone else on the same path. And if this spoke to you, make sure to subscribe for more Jung-inspired explorations of sensitivity, the shadow, and the journey of turning what once limited you into the very thing that empowers you. Your sensitivity is not a burden. It's your superpower when you learn how to wield it.